Hey guys, I'm really excited that Bob Clark is my guest on the Transformations podcast today. Bob's got decades of martial arts training experience under his belt in traditional martial arts and in high competitive level combat sports, both as a competitor and a trainer of world class gold medal athletes. Bob was also dedicated his life to protecting Americans, joining the Navy in 1984, joining the Philadelphia Police Department after that. And then after 9/11, re-enlisting in the military and deploying in Iraq as part of an infantry reconnaissance platoon. Bob came back as a police officer again, and now he's working in different law enforcement areas. So he will be talking about all of this and the experiences that he's gone through and all of these things. Let's check it out. Welcome to the Transformations Podcast. Here, guests and I will share our transformative experiences and we'll explore how to find excellence in life. Bob Clark, welcome to the Transformations Podcast, man. Thanks so much for coming out tonight.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you or see you.
Yeah, likewise. You know, you had said once that you loved and lived for over 3 decades in the violent world here and abroad. What does that mean?
That I've been involved with law enforcement for over 3 decades. Military, some before that and some during that. Almost all, or I think all, my law enforcement has been in and around Philadelphia or tied to Philadelphia. So I've worked outside of Philadelphia, even connected to other states and countries. But my law enforcement experience always tied back to Philadelphia. Prior to going in there, I served in the U.S. Navy. And then after 9/11, I went into the U.S. Army National Guard and served in one tour in Iraq.
Wow, that's a lot of dedication and commitment to America. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. You and I had talked a few years ago about, there's a lot of shootings in Philadelphia. And some of the, even though there's a lot of shooting, the number of deaths is decreasing. And I wouldn't have put the things together, but I think you had said to me that it's because, University of Pennsylvania Hospital, Presbyterian Hospital, all these great hospitals around are like saving these people who would have died, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, because of the technologies. Do you feel like that's one of the reasons why the death count is down? Or just
the death count, unfortunately, is back up and maybe even higher. But if you look at the number of people that are shot, so I guess that would be a ratio compared to who dies. Yes, the level of medical care and technology involved and definitely is making many more people survive now that wouldn't. And you can probably attribute that to a couple things. The one is, yes, you have hospitals like University of Pennsylvania and Temple and all these other hospitals. And let's face it, those surgeons in there, the trauma surgeons and the emergency medical staff and these trauma units are unbelievable. And their training is live. It's hands-on and it's daily. I mean, sadly, that's sad in a big way, good in a way that their skill level is what it is. The second part of that is we, as a nation, have been at war, since 9/11, essentially, up until very recently, and a lot of new ability to keep people alive and handle trauma was also honed and developed there, and the exchange back and forth. A lot of your military medical staffs, and I'm not even just saying doctors and stuff. Some of the doctors and nurses do come from civilian trauma centers, but the medics, the actual soldiers, sailors, sailors are also the medics for the Marines, airmen and all that stuff, and the PJs and your special operations a lot of them cross-train with these trauma centers. So you get that flow back and forth, which, I mean, for everyone, I mean, whether it's you having a car accident, I mean, the injuries are, similar to things that may happen with violence. Those skills go back and forth. So for the average person, that's a good thing. So unfortunately, murders and shootings have increased greatly in our region, especially in Philadelphia, in the last 5 to 8 years. But probably in ratio to how many would have died when I first came into law enforcement in '89 to now is greatly decreased, and that's a great credit to the medical staffs at these hospitals, and the skill level they have, which is it's unbelievable. I mean, I've seen people with traumatic injuries shot many times, and they live, and nobody would think they would live.
Wow.
So it's impressive. It's unfortunate, but it's impressive.
Yeah. So the even though the stats may show less deaths in Philly or a flat line of deaths, the actual violent crimes and the shootings is still going up.
Yeah, the last, like I said, 5 or so years is in my 30 plus years in law enforcement. This is the most lawless and violent time I've ever seen, and that includes I was in the everyone says a crack epidemic. I worked during that. But the difference, one of the biggest differences I see now is in the crack epidemic. Yeah, there were innocents caught in the middle at times, but primarily the violence, good or bad, was uh, people involved in the game or the drug trade against people involved in the trade. And even the peripheral where someone connected to that trade, whether it was family members of someone involved in it. Nowadays, the huge difference I see is the lawlessness and violence is perpetrated to everyone. It's not confined to certain neighborhoods either. I mean, you see multiple shootings, carjackings, whatever in our center city, which you and I've enjoyed together, great meals and kung fu, and
Mm-hmm.
the tourist area. I mean, shootings right in Independence Hall.
Wow.
So areas where people generally in those days wouldn't have worried, even though it was very violent in other neighborhoods. It's everywhere. There's nowhere. That's what it's just so widespread. I've never seen it like that. I think a lot of it too is I don't know, you see different attitudes even with people that aren't involved in violence. You don't see the courtesies as much. I don't know. I see a general kind of I don't know non-friendship attitude more. It could be people are a little scared and standoffish because hey, you don't know what's going to happen now. But
Right. It seems like we're in really I mean, obviously a bad political time in our own country
mm-hmm,
where lines are being drawn in the sand between groups of people who were friends for every other reason
mm-hmm,
than they like politically, that the courtesies and okay, we just won't talk about that. It was, don't talk about, how much somebody makes, religion or politics and all,
right,
all's good. And
or,
now it's like, forget it.
right. Or if you do, you have your opinion, I have mine. We can still have them.
Yeah.
That's a big difference too. But I mean, this is even beyond that. That I'm saying it's just it's me and you not knowing each other, and I'll cut you off, or
Right.
I'll steal a parking spot in front of you. It's just yeah, you had that always, but it just seems like everything is a little amplified. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking for it, or I'm in areas that maybe you see it more. I don't know, but
Well, it happened to me about a week and a half ago. I'm on I don't know, a smaller street here, and then the main street is this way. That's more popular. And there's like a hill that if you're if I come out my street and you look left, the street goes up like a hill. So you got to be like 35 miles or 30 miles an hour because once you get over that hill, then you can see the rest of the road.
mm-hmm,
And there was no one there, so I turned right, and this pickup truck just right down and just honking his horn. And I'm like going as fast as I can. Then
Mm-hmm.
he pulls around me into the oncoming traffic in front of me and slams on his brakes. And like, so I got to slow down, you know. And it was just like, okay, so, and he's just sitting there waiting. And now there's this row of car. I'm like, now what's he going to do? Get out of his car now? You know,
Oh yeah,
like,
and again,
what's
he's not being smart either. He doesn't know you. You
right?
know,
That's what I'm saying.
you're the kung fu master, or you're somebody that has a gun and he doesn't. I mean, is it worth it over that? You know that, but yeah, it's. I mean, another crime that's exploding is in Philadelphia anyway. Is the hit and runs. I think it's like 6 times as many people have been killed by hit and runs now than maybe ever. I don't know. How do you run people over and just leave them there? And it's not the guy running away from the police or running away from some bad guys shooting at them. They're just it's that lawlessness. It's I can blow through lights. Who cares?
Right.
And unfortunately, many in the community are paying. And you know, a lot of the people are kids and old people as far as those hit and runs. You know, somebody that can't move that fast or a kid that doesn't understand. You know, and
Right.
it's just I don't know. I always say if you want to fix, everyone's like, what do we do? Because I've been doing this for so long. I said, say the number one thing is look in the mirror, who you see in there, start fixing that, and then start fixing the ones next to you, your kids, family, whatever. And you'll do probably more impact than volunteering for 400 different organizations. And I mean, it's fix that first, and because that the waves go out, you know, from
Right.
there. That's my biggest thing I suggest because I know people that in their hearts right, they're volunteering here or there and the other thing, but their own house is a mess, and
Yeah.
you know, it's not helping if you can't fix that first. You know,
Right.
mirror and then closest to you, and then work from there.
Yeah. I think that's the only way because we only have control over our own actions, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and our own choices, right? We don't really have control over other people, so you can't impose something on them.
Right.
So, you know, you're absolutely right there. My wife was cut off at, well, when we moved out here in Montgomery County 7 years ago, she was at the Chick-fil-A, you know, drive through, and they said, okay, can you please pull into a spot? We don't have the one thing, we'll walk it out to you. And she pulled in a spot with the family minivan, and this guy just like starts honking at her, pulled behind her so she couldn't get out, and was screaming at her for stealing his spot. So she calls me, and I go over. I'm like, "Hey, man, what's going on?" And the guy's like, "This fucking go to sit in my spot and did it, and I'll teach her, the entitled bitch." And I was like, "Yeah, man, she really did that." Oh, yeah, you know. And I was pretending like I was. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, "Dude, I'm her husband. You get out of here."
Yeah.
You know,
But it's crazy.
it's
Yeah.
nuts.
You
You're talking
know,
about a parking spot at a fast food place, like, you know.
I guess the
It's,
argument it is Chick-fil-A. Those are long lines.
yeah, yeah, those are long lines. Those things are crazy.
Yeah.
So in 1980, you joined the Navy.
Yeah. 84.
84, 80 to
Yeah.
84.
No, 84 is when I actually joined.
Oh, in 1984.
Yeah, correct.
And what was your decision to join the Navy? I mean, rather than say, you know, Army, Marines, Air Force, is that something that you felt like you'd like to be on ships, you'd like to be in a submarine? My brother was in the Navy, he was in submarines for 3 months at a
Yeah.
time.
I mean, I knew I wanted to be in the military. I wasn't quite sure exactly. I did talk to the Army. I wasn't too excited about the Army. My dad was Navy.
Okay.
Some other relatives of mine were Navy. Some were Army too. Um, I didn't. I had no interest in going to college, and not because I don't. I don't think I could easily handle it. It's I want to be in the middle of stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
and so I went in the Navy. I did get assigned to a ship. I in the beginning worked in what would be considered deck seamanship. That's, handling mooring the ship, unmooring the ship, dropping anchors. On my ship, we had some boats, smaller boats on it. I eventually was put on the boat crew. Um, I was on rigging crews too. One of the other collateral duties is what they would call it is we had security force. So we didn't have, some ships have Marines assigned to security force. Our ship didn't. We use Navy personnel. So I was on the security and reaction force. Got to train with that. And one of the things our ship used to do was it's called underway replenishment. So it's one of the actual, back in the day, I don't know what the rest of the world's navies can do now, but one of our strengths is we could be moving at a pretty high rate of speed, pull one ship next to the other, send rigging gear between the two ships, and send supplies and or personnel back and forth without stopping. It was called underway replenishment. And so I was on one of the rig crews that did that. It's a lot of work. A lot of times it's at night, and because you don't want the bad guys to see what you're doing, so to speak. And I looked down by the our flight deck. We had a flight deck with a couple helicopters assigned to our ship, and I saw these guys sleeping by the boats, wearing basic Navy swim trunks, had some fins, a snorkel, and a mask next to them. And it's 3 a.m. I'm like, that looks a lot better than this. So I went to my division officer, who was a Navy diver, and I said, yo, how do I get to that school? And me and him worked out together, which helped probably. And he said, we're going to be sending 2 guys in the next class. It's pilot rescue swimmer school, surface swimmer school. And I said, all right, I'm in. It was actually a very hard school, but afterwards, I got the pleasure of being that guy.
Was it all above water, or did you wear scuba gear as well?
No scuba gear. It was a mask, fins, snorkel. It was a surface rescue swimmer. It was mainly for people overboard, or if an aircraft went down, pilots or air crew were in the water, stuff like that. The interesting, because we're martial artists, is you actually did learn some control techniques, which was kind of interesting, and the principles apply even on land. Because someone in the water, especially if they're suffering any kind of trauma or hypothermia, a lot of times they can be a little delusional, and they will fight who's trying to help them. And if you're talking air crew, some of them had back in the day, I don't know what they carry now, had pistols and or a survival knife. And so they taught you ways to approach and get quick control over them, so that if they tried to go for something like that, they couldn't get to you real fast, and you could kind of control them. And they also taught you what to do. If someone thinks they're drowning, the first thing they do to the first person that comes to them is they try and climb on top of them, keep themselves up. So they told you an easy way to get out of that, which was basically swim straight down. They don't want to go with you there. they're going to leave you go. So we got a little bit of hand-to-hand stuff there. Well, nothing crazy, but more controlling, but positioning, which was smart. And then in the reaction force, you also got control techniques, with a little bit of striking in case someone needs to be taken into custody or dropped, depending on what we were protecting or reacting to. And so I got a little bit of there, nothing too cool or fancy, just, well, to be honest, in the real world, KISS is what works anyway. Keep it simple, stupid. So
I can imagine that's got to be difficult, because when you're on land, you've got, lever fulcrum base where you're grappling. When you're in the water, you're 360 with no base, really.
Mm-hmm.
You creating that base on one of their limbs or their torso or something to get the leverage to apply.
And that's why you would attach in the most practical way right to their back.
Right.
Which is also an easy way to swim with them if I'm going to rescue them,
Right.
because I can hold from their backside, put an arm through, and swim with them kind of on top of my torso, so they're above water. So
Mm-hmm.
even if they agree, that's kind of where you want to be anyway. But if they're fighting you, it's even better place to be. You don't want to be in front of them if you can help
Right.
it. So it made sense all the way around, even if they conceded and it's like, hey, rescue me. That's where you kind of wanted them anyway. So, um,
Now, is this where you were first introduced to martial arts, or before that, did you have your Hapkido and other arts that you were involved in?
so my introduction to martial arts was my dad.
Mm.
My dad was did some boxing, actually some boxing in the Navy, and he was a pretty good wrestler. He was a high school wrestler. He actually made it to, back then things were different than wrestling nowadays as far as divisions and all that kind of stuff for the state. But he made it to, back then, the Bucksmont Championship in wrestling, and ended up not winning because he got a dislocated shoulder. Not taken away, like my dad will never. He's a pretty modest guy. He's like, I lost. My shoulder got dislocated and the other guys didn't.
Right.
So he lost. Unfortunately, what ruined his wrestling career is, you always say the old joke that you would hear when kids are throwing rocks at each other or flicking pennies at each other. So you better watch, you're going to knock each other's eye out. Well, someone threw a coin or a washer and hit my dad in the eye
Oh.
and destroyed that eye. And so back then, of course, we talked about medicine earlier. Nowadays, it wouldn't probably do anything. Locked him down in a hospital for a couple months, wouldn't let his head move, and then when he came back, he played football for high school too. They wouldn't let him play football or wrestle, and wrestling is what he loved. They did let him play baseball, but as the eye that was destroyed destroyed his depth perception, so you know how that helped his hitting.
Yeah.
But he was so fast, they kept him. He was
Mm.
maybe the second fastest kid in his high school. Even though he didn't run track, there's two state champion there, and they went back and forth on who would beat each other.
Wow.
But so that was my intro, and then he got into Japanese karate, Shotokan. He ended up becoming a black belt in that. I don't know if he got higher than first degree or not. And as a kid, he always taught us wrestling and some boxing. I remember boxing my one brother we put piles of socks on each hands, and I mean we boxed too. It wasn't nice
Wow.
boxing. And then so he hung a heavy bag in the house, and we started showing me some Shotokan, and I would go to classes with him every now and then, and I didn't join the school. And of course, like everyone back in the day, my dad got into Karate Illustrated and Black Belt all the magazines, and I would sit there and start reading the magazines. And I saw an article, I think it was in Karate Illustrated, of a guy named Kim Se-young, or Se-young Kim, who was a famous Hapkido guy from California, Chong Kim's brother.
Hmm.
And I looked at it, and it had everything, like kicking, striking, joint locks, throws. And I don't know, seventh grade maybe. I said, man, that looks cool. So back then we didn't do the internet. We went to the yellow pages.
Right.
I found Chung's Hapkido School on Frankfurt Avenue. And so I guess somewhere around 78, 79 probably. And my godmother, God bless her, and great woman, said for my birthday, she'd sign me up and get me a few months and walk me down to school. And
Nice.
that started me with hop. But almost very near after that, he brought over Sun Tzu, who I still train with to this day. Son has his own school on 5th Street in Olney,
Mm.
called the Hung Kook Gym. And so I consider him primarily my Hapkido teacher. I was with Chong until Chong closed his school, and that was in the 80s before I went in the Navy. And then once I went in the Navy, of course, in there I did some boxing as well. I did some kickboxing, more like PKA style kickboxing,
Mm-hmm.
with some kickboxers that were in the Navy, some martial arts. At the time, I couldn't find Sun, and I trained with a guy who was an author. Uh, I mean, there's some people that aren't huge fans of him. What I got out of him to this day, I think was very good. So he claimed to be a Hapkido teacher. That's what made me go toward him, and a Jiu-Jitsu teacher, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. And so I joined because of the Hapkido, and I couldn't find Sun at the time. But he was very self-defense based. And whether his lineage was real or not, or whatever with the Hapkido, what he showed for the street was very effective. And I still use some of that stuff in what I teach now and what I do now. And he wrote many books. He was in many magazines. I'm in a black belt magazine grappling book because of his chapter that was put into it. I'm one of the people that was in that chapter. I was in black belt through him. I was in the official karate magazine, I think it was. So he had the kudos, and then later some people were like, I don't know. But as far as taking it to the street, so to speak, and what he showed was legit. And, so I didn't discount anything. And I never personally tried to challenge his lineage. He didn't talk any crazy stuff to me. I don't know about other people, but my focus he fulfilled.
You want to say his name or rather not?
I'm not going to throw it out there. I mean, just because I personally like the man. I respect him. He's now a great author outside of the martial arts world and writes for Marvel and a whole bunch of other people. So I'm like,
if I throw out some initials, would you say yes or no?
If you said initials, yeah, but I wouldn't say.
You don't have to say the name.
Yeah.
JM?
Yes.
Okay. So cool. So, but I mean, your whole thing is you want to have that street defense.
Mm-hmm.
What I know you through is always like, what's going to work? How's it going to work? How can I use this? Is this BS or not BS? So I could see how that would very much fulfill those.
Right.
That category.
And even when my dad's mindset is very clean to reality. Mm-hmm. He did traditional karate. He liked traditional karate. He fought in traditional karate tournaments, which I later learned, in my opinion, seemed more real than at the time. I was doing a lot of the open karate style tournaments and stuff. It's actually one of the frustrations that helped turn me to what I think a good turn in martial arts, where karate tournaments didn't look as cool as the open tournaments. Right. I was kind of, I was a kid. So looks cool as kids fall for that. And my dad was always pretty straight and simple. Like, yeah, in the real world, you try that on someone, basically said on him.
Right.
It's not going to be a great outcome. And me and him sparred all the time. And he would straighten me out because I try the cool Hapkido techniques, because Hapkido is a whole bunch of kicks as well as other stuff. And I soon learned that the kiss kicks work a lot better than the cool kicks because he would make you learn it.
Yeah.
So I think that passed on. And don't get me wrong, my dad's not like an aggressive person or mean. Like, he's totally chill. It's just he's very practical and pragmatic. He's not about the show. Like, he was a wrestler, and he would hate it if we turned on pro wrestling. Yeah,
Right.
and like that's his
But that was
mindset.
so cool, Ricky,
Oh,
to see
I
you
agree.
come
What
on,
kid
try
didn't
to
watch it? You know, and you learned to not turn it on when he was around because you didn't want him sitting in my ear going, "That's
uh-huh.
fake. That's garbage." So what? It's cool.
He's jumping off the ropes.
Yeah, yeah,
He's hitting him with a chair.
yeah. But yeah, that guy. I mean, that's what got me into that, and something else that what you might find unique is, and you might not think this is like a Philadelphia type thing, but so my neighborhood where I grew up in the Olney section of Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
Back in the day, it was primarily Irish German neighborhood on one part and black on the other part. Um, and in my neighborhood, yeah, I mean, you always had a few different groups of people in a neighborhood like that, but we had a group that liked to work out all the time, whether it was running or lifting or whatever. And I was in that crew, and several in that section also did martial arts, wrestling, or boxing. And the cool thing is like, especially on like Saturdays, there was a park in Olney called Fisher's Park, and a bunch of us would meet there, and it'd be Kempo guys, be Taekwondo guys, but old school, to like more what I would call ITF style nowadays. It was
Right.
pre-Olympic Taekwondo.
Yeah.
There was, and I'll throw kudos out to someone you know actually right here. Even back in the day, a lot of people were like, Kung Fu, except for because Bruce Lee was cool. Wing Chun, everyone thought Wing Chun worked
Right.
back then, but regular Kung Fu was kind of like, eh. But a group of guys from my neighborhood, and then would bring other people from the school who trained with Norm Smith,
Mm-hmm.
um, came, and they all could fight.
Nice.
And we didn't fight tournament rules. We low kick, swept, throw, whatever. We had no pads on. Me. Sometimes we put little gloves on, but and we went at it all hard for hours. And the one kung fu guy who was one of Norm's guys, and he knows who he is, was also a very good wrestler, and he would shoot on you, and it made you become very aware of leaving legs dangling out or having your base spread too much, and we all went hard, and no nastiness. And then word got out. We had some guys from West Philly from Ozzy Wright's school start
Yeah.
showing up. So we had a nice mix there, but it also taught me KISS again.
Okay.
Keep it simple, stupid, and it also gave me one of my first experiences of truly sharing and exchanging. So, and not that I could do them now, but I learned one of Norm's five animal style form.
Mm-hmm.
There were maybe a couple of them, and some of those drills, because we didn't just spar. We work on stuff like, hey, you want to see this? You want to try that? And um and and uh, and then we even would go to tournaments together, and we, even though we weren't the same school, we consider ourselves like a kind of the park boy team. And
Yeah.
I actually watched the guy from Norm's school use. We talk about or we don't talk. Well, we've talked about it, but a lot of people are like forms are crap and don't do forms and they're not real. And we watched. I watched one of the guys from Norm's school use one of the crane methods that he showed us that we drilled in a live tournament and just blast the guy with it.
Wow.
With it essentially looks like a ridge hand, and
Mm-hmm.
we would, or maybe you wouldn't, but I would have called it a ridge hand back then.
Yeah.
But he did the true block and everything to the punch, and that guy could not stop. And then he put the train on him, and this guy was one of the baddest dudes I knew.
Wow.
And so, but he would actually. I mean, how many times you see guys spar, and the minute they're sparring, I don't care what their style is, it looks like bad kickboxing.
Mm-hmm.
He boxed and was a great wrestler. But when he sparred martial arts, he used what the drill, like the Tiger Crane type drills that you saw, and he lit people up with it. And I saw him in real fights do the same thing. So
That's cool. I think
yeah,
it comes all down to training, right? I mean,
yeah,
even the MMA guys, or even early, the Gracies before MMA were kicking everybody's butt is because they're training toward an outcome, which
Mm-hmm.
is to take the opponent out. Where
Yep.
martial artists are training for 100 different reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and the sparring is sparring. It's not learn how to take somebody out. It's
Well,
sparring.
that's even you saw that even before them with
Cardiovascular and the
right. You would
the
see the martial artist challenge the boxer
boxers,
and
right?
get beat down by the boxer. Well, one of the big differences there is the boxer's training to fight.
Right.
The martial artist, like you said, sparring might be part of it, but there's a lot more. The boxer's conditioning his body nonstop if he's a true boxer. He's getting hit all the time. He knows what it's like to hit a moving target all the time and really hit it, take blows, and his cardio and all that stuff is at a different level. And then if you're putting it against somebody that's just a martial artist, it's not really an even fight. Not saying that the martial artists, if that's your thing and you're a martial artist and you're claiming that's what you're going to do, then you should train appropriately as well and not be a hobbyist. So,
right.
And I go back at the traditionalists too. You hear how many traditionalists you say, oh, the MMA guy he's fighting under rules and gloves and you can't do this, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And anyone that's been in a real battle knows heart, speed, power, conditioning, and good technique will overcome all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And if the first time you're getting hurt or hit is in your fight and it's in the street, that can be a bad day for you. So there's give and take on both sides.
Mm-hmm. You had told me one time that you used to go to a restaurant in Northeast Philly, and the owner was a Charlie Foot teacher.
Yeah.
They had sparring night or something. I missed all the fun stuff. I mean, I started in 79 too, but I was probably too young,
Well, this was
to know
I
some of
mean,
that.
this was in the 2000s.
Oh, I was traveling in Asia a lot then.
Maybe in the late 90s.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's actually a Japanese restaurant now. And the guy, I forget what the owner's last name. It was by Grant and Bustleton. And his name was Sam. But I don't even remember how the conversation truly came up between me and Sam. But we got in a conversation. Somehow martial arts came up. I think he was a Hong Kong guy originally. Really nice guy, decent food. And I learned that he did Shuai Foot. And then all of a sudden he said to me one day, he goes, yeah, every now and then, it wasn't once a month or whatever, but it was every now and then, he goes, a group of us meet here and we bring wine. He goes, I cook real Chinese food and stuff like duck's feet and he goes, not the stuff that we serve Americans. And we'd eat and talk and enjoy and then move the tables out and do drills, sort of like the park explanation, drills and spar, not as hard as we did at the park. Now, again, we're older and we're also in a restaurant. But we sparred and there was one guy that did some Muay Thai there that was invited. Another guy was a Bagua guy, Sam. Then there was, I may be wrong, but I think he's some big executive with Perkins. He didn't do the restaurant. He didn't do martial arts, but he brought wine. So somehow he was invited.
Yeah.
But nice. It was a fun experience. And again, it was unique at that time. It must have been, now I'm thinking, it must have been maybe mid 2000s or early 2000s, because I remember at the time I was doing a little Jook Lum, Southern Manis, Kwang Sai Gi Jook Lum Tung Lung Pai. And so in that sparring, I did other, I sparred too, but I did try and implement some of the Southern Manis stuff when I was sparring the different guys, and which worked. I mean, it did okay. It wasn't like it didn't do good, and I was no expert then nor now at it. And but I was like, I'm always like, let's test things out before we say, yeah, that doesn't work, you know. And it was fun. We had a good time, but then he ended up. I think he might have moved or something happened, but he closed or he sold the restaurant. Now it's a Japanese restaurant. But yeah, it was fun times right here in Philly.
Yeah.
And not in Chinatown either,
Not in
Northeast Philly.
Chinatown. Yeah, you're talking Olney. You know, one of my Filipino teachers was this old Filipino guy. He lived on Fifth Street in Olney. And I
Okay.
used to train with him there. His name was Onofre Escorpizo, and he's in my book Filipino Martial Culture. There's a
Okay,
chapter.
I have that book.
Yeah, he's in there. I go to his house. He'd make adobo, and we drink. He'd pour me whiskey, eat adobo, and then we'd just train in his living room.
But
And
you're not a really Filipino martial artist if you don't eat balut.
that's I'm not eating bullet.
Yeah, come on.
I can't do it, man.
I'm gonna take your sticks away.
That's okay. I'll buy more. There's just I'm not adventurous food wise. Like
All
I
right.
have a duck foot at dim sum or something, you know, I can work my way through it. But don't give me bugs. Don't give me balut. Don't give me like blood. But Escorpizo is cool. He died at 104.
Whew.
104, yeah.
See, he ate balut.
Him in the late 90s. Yeah, because I was going to Drexel, and I met his. I was teaching Eskrima in I forget where in New Jersey, and there's a Filipino kid in the Taekwondo school where I was teaching it, and he said, "Oh, my uncle does something like this." I'm like, "What? Give me his information." Called him and went right over and started training.
That's cool.
That was pretty cool. And you don't think like, you know, there's just people around. The other guy is Binas, Herminio Binas, who's also in the Filipino martial culture book, and he was on in South Philly, I think 13th Street or something in South
Okay.
Philly. He lived right there. I just saw him walking down the street
He-
one day, big poster, you know, carrying posters full of pictures of somebody doing bayonet, like he had taught the Philippine Constabulary after World War II.
People don't realize how much
People are everywhere.
depth we have here in Philly. I mean,
Yeah.
Sun Tzu was, I mean, in the Hapkido world, which, you know, maybe outside of your realm, I don't know, but one of the most famous Hapkido masters in the world is a guy, Lee Chong-su, or Chong-su Lee, because he was one of the big leaders of the Korean demonstration team.
Mm.
Well, the captain of that, when Lee Chong-su came on, is Sun Tzu from now in Philadelphia. I mean, and they still consider themselves brothers, but you bring up captain of that team, everyone, and he was the captain, Lee Chong-su, but before that, the original captain was Sun Tzu, who's from Philadelphia now. And I mean, we had Okazaki and the Japanese,
Yeah.
and then
We had Chuck Norris's Tangsudo teacher was here.
yeah, Shin,
Shin, J. Chul
yep.
Shin.
Jaisho Shin or Shin Jesho, yeah, on Oregon Ave, and
Yep.
and maybe one of the most famous ever to be here, which I have a loose tie to through the back doors, due to martial arts that I ended up going into, which was Judo, was Takahiko Ishikawa or Ishikawa Takahiko, who was All Japan champion and tied for All Japan champion. And why it's so legendary is the guy, and the only time in the history of Japan and Judo that the All Japan was 2 winners was when he and Masahiko Kimura, hence the Kimura armbar is named after,
Right.
fought to a draw.
Wow.
And where did he open his dojo? Broad Street in Philadelphia. You know, and then my longest and original judo teacher was a student of his. So wow. Philadelphia has a rich martial arts history. Not, you know, not that the Americans here too aren't great and haven't picked it all up, but
the early days and the big guys who brought the arts here,
you
know,
like a lot of people don't know that though. They don't. You know, you think New York, you think San Francisco, you think LA, But right here, we had some pretty deep.
Pretty tough guy. So after the Navy, you joined an operations as an operations specialist.
Yeah, so I became an operations specialist. That's more sit on your butt job.
Mhm. Yeah.
In that you operate radars, navigation systems, secure communication systems. Another thing back in the day they called identification friend or foe, and it was a signal that would tell you if an aircraft that was detected, it was the good guys or the bad guys. So in that during that period of my career, I was also part of Operation Earnest Will, which you have to be old to know. Back in those days, the Iran-Iraq war was on, and so Iran tried to strangle the petroleum from the Middle East from the rest of the world by shutting down what they call the Straits of Hormuz and the North Arabian Sea, and they would attack tankers to stop the flow. So the United States initiated an operation to keep the flow open and keep the straits open. And during that, one of the big incidents, obviously, and it wasn't the Iranians that did it, was when the USS Stark got hit with 2 Exocet missiles from a Iraqi French Mirage jet. The Mirage is a French-made jet that the Iraqis had, and fired 2 Exocets, and 37 or 8, so some in the 30s sailors were killed in that one. We were out there at that time. But so that was the end of my naval career. Was actually in the end I flew out of Masira, Oman, not because of any injury. My time was just up, and started heading back the long trek back to Philly.
And you became a police officer at that time in Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So that was early 90s?
89 was when I went in the police department.
Yeah. But when was Frank Rizzo mayor? Was that
Prior to me.
Prior to you, okay.
Yeah, I met him many times, and the patrol district I was initially assigned to, he lived in.
Mm-hmm.
There was basically 3 types of communities there: the real rich in Chestnut Hill, which is up where he lived.
Yeah.
Middle to upper middle, in Mount Airy, and then maybe lower to lower middle in Germantown.
Yeah.
And that was all part of where I did my patrol. I was usually down the lower end.
Yeah.
Young guys, that's where you went, which is the way it should be. That's where you learned.
Yeah.
And so that's where I did the beginning of my law enforcement career, in that Germantown, Mount Airy, Chestnut Hill, but primarily Germantown.
Mm-hmm.
That was good. Great people train me and teach me. We worked. You were a family. I think law enforcement has really changed a lot since back then. It wasn't a job. It truly was like a calling, so to speak. And most of the people you worked with were there because that's what they wanted to do, not
Right.
because they were trying to get a job with benefits or pensions or like. It was like team. You were a team.
Yeah.
And in those areas, you learn quickly. Again, KISS makes sense, whether it's hand to hand or with using your tools, your weapons, so to speak, or whatever. The more fancy you get, more intricate you get when it comes to combat. Anyway, I'm not talking. There's no place for any of that. Don't read me as one of these guys that doesn't like the art side either. But in that environment, you need to be KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And even if you've done any sparring, you learn real fast.
Yeah.
You can pull off, and I pulled it off before I was older and fatter. I used to hit people with good, cool spin kicks and high kicks and different things. But most of what you still scored, even in those days, was still the simpler, more direct stuff. So,
yeah.
But law enforcement defensive tactics has changed a lot from what it is now and what it was then. Back then, a lot of what you learned was pressure point stuff and simple wrist locks and kind of Aikido-ish type joint locking
Come along and the
yeah,
goosenecks and those things.
yeah, stuff like that. Which not saying none of that works. There's time and place for a lot of stuff that people say doesn't work. But in a fight, that's
hard.
It's not going to get you in. And again, I'm not attacking people on pressure points. Hapkido had tons of pressure point stuff. But when you talk about drugs, alcohol, or just pure adrenaline, grabbing or pressing pressure points, not saying necessarily striking a sensitive area, is very hard, even if you hit it, to make it work because the people are so juiced up. And like I said, even if it's adrenaline, it doesn't work. It could work later, or it could work on I'm trying to move somebody who's passive resisting, maybe encouraging them to get out of their sit down position or lay down. But they're not having an adrenaline dump for the most point. But if you're in a fight, you have to know how to handle things a little differently, which to the credit of law enforcement and the military too, they've evolved more to that direction. Some of it may be too much, more in the military side, I think, but it's you have to leverage things are more important, I think, especially in this era where striking, which you could be good at, obviously is a bad optic. I'm not saying there's never a time for that. All out fight for your life is an all out fight for your life. Doesn't matter what, if you're law enforcement or civilian or whatever. But if you're good at different types of leverage and control based off of leverage, you can get a lot done without having to hit, and it'll work when it's live. And it's kiss based too. So, but yeah, back in the old days, actually, I'm a little funny story. So I'm in the academy, and the instructor, I'll say his last name, I think he's passed away, unfortunately, Hill, was doing a pressure point thing. Now I'm a Hapkido guy, so I've had pressure points done to me every single class since I was in 7th grade. So even without adrenaline dump, I can ignore them. So being young, being a little cocky, he'd say, sit down, I'm going to make you move using these pressure points. And now the worst thing is I end up having like bruises behind my ears and bruises under my nose. But out of spite, I refuse to move. So, but again, it even goes to my point there. I'm not even fighting with adrenaline dump or any. And just because I was conditioned to it, I could ignore it. Did it hurt? Yeah, it hurt. I'm not going to lie and say, oh, it doesn't hurt me. It hurt, but I knew what it was, something I was experienced with, so I could ignore it to be the pain in the you-know-what,
Right.
Which is pretty much what he called me.
Yeah. Well, that's how we all refer to you, Oh, that guy's coming, the pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
I would imagine back in the 90s into the early 2000s, I would do demos for different police departments with other teachers. And it was always a thing about, okay, the cops can come train with you if they want on their own time, but we can't bring what you're teaching, the Filipino stuff, into the department, right? And there's like guidelines for who they pick and what they're training, and it goes through all this stuff. So I imagine that at any given time, in your time, they're doing the pressure points and the locks, and it took a while to get in. They put money into that program, and they're going to teach that for X numbers of years. How long does it take, or how much feedback do the officers give to where they start modifying that training or thinking about bringing in another program?
Well, I'm going to throw something at you is sad, but a lot of the training is dictated based off of liability.
Yeah.
So sadly, it's lawyers. It's not whether the officer can actually protect himself or protect you using it. It's if we teach them this, like those things, we're probably not going to get sued because
Breaking in face,
right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that seems to take the lead.
Mm.
And then trends will also take the lead, or will jump in with it if it fits that liability thing. If they're like, oh wait, that looks like they can do that and not ever hit anybody, and can arrest them without using any force, so to speak. But you actually lightly touched on one of my big beefs, which I mean, I'll throw him out there. You met him, you know him, and he actually aggressively tried to get a program like this implemented in Philadelphia and other areas around Philadelphia. Was David O. He was a city councilman in Philadelphia, now running for mayor, but he's a martial artist. So he kickboxed. He started with Taekwondo. He did some Judo, and I know he has black belt in Taekwondo. He's now a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And he hit on a big thing, especially in Philadelphia. They're so short-handed. These officers are working immense hours under a lot of stress, too. It's not like chilled hours. And they also have families. So you're saying some in the public are saying, oh, they're not well trained. They need more training, blah, blah, blah. But you want them to use their money on their little bit of free time to pay to get trained to help you out.
Right.
And people say, well, I pay for my training. I train on my time. Yeah, but that's for yourself.
Right. You're not doing it for the community.
It's yeah. And so David O actually put a resolution up about, he calls it minimal force training. That rubs a lot of cops wrong, because it made it sound like they're using too much force now. The rules of law enforcement defensive tactics are you use the least amount of force necessary to effect the arrest or whatever. So it's already the minimal force they're trying to use. Do they have the skills, which I think is what David meant, to maybe use less force because they have a higher level of skill now, which the training will give them? You know what I mean?
Right.
So he brought up at city council, but we want to expect these guys to use their own time, their own money to do this. Something needs to be done where they're either compensated time-wise, whether it's a program within the department and 2 hours a week they go train, or we give them 2 or 3 hours a week to train on their own through an approved program and we help finance it, whatever. We can argue that out, but let's agree that they need to be compensated without taking their own money away and their own time away to benefit us. And nobody voted for it.
Wow.
So how real? That's why no matter what side of politics we're on, when you vote for no action on something you claim you want, it sounds like noise to me. And that's what you need. You need the guys to have the allotted time to be able to do this, whether it's through the department itself, or some approved programs outside where they say, yeah, this meets the criteria. The other thing you have is Pennsylvania, the program has to be approved by MOPEC, which is the state accreditation. That's why, like you were talking about how you were coming in, but they're saying, yeah, they can adopt that themselves, but it's kind of on themselves,
right?
Because it's not approved by MOPEC. Now, MOPEC has definitely adjusted into a different area where they adopt much more practical things, and it is part of the program. But that's where you're at it. So that's why you can't bring in the MMA expert to officially teach the officers to do something, or the Filipino martial arts guy to come in and teach them baton techniques, or slash asp techniques or blade techniques, um, because it's not accepted under the state's accreditation.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the Gracies have done a hell of a marketing, and they are now accepted. Controlled Force is another program that's kind of accepted. I'm a state for the state agency I work for now. I'm a defensive tactics instructor for them, and I mean, we use blending of the Gracie survival tactics and the spear system is blended in, and some other things. And so it's definitely a lot more practical now and more real. And our system I like because we're not over jiu-jitsufied. May annoy some people when they say that, but I could give you a whole story why I'm not a BJJ black belt and why I went a different route. And it's all based on law enforcement job and what I thought would work best.
Yeah.
And so I did my own field test, and the jiu-jitsu was much more practical then than the game it has become many places now. But I went a different route because I just felt it was better. And I was in a city where we got to work, it wasn't what I thought.
Right.
So, I mean, that's the next phase after getting into the basic training in the academy. My next more traditional law enforcement phase came with that comparison. I could tell you about it or not. It's up to you. But
yeah, we'd love to hear.
So two things led me in this direction. One was we talked about those open martial arts tournaments.
Yeah.
And I was still younger, and I liked competing. And I was competing in the traditional point tournaments and stuff. And I just they were just so fake and just so horrible, in my opinion. I'm not taking away anyone's successes or whatever. And I won medals and trophies and stuff too. But I was like, this is tag. It's not real. And you would hit somebody, and judge would say you didn't hit them, or the guy would barely touch you with tag, and they would call it. So, and that's when, of course, the UFC started kicking off, early 90s. And so I was like, well, I want to compete in something else, and we got to get a little more real here. So I decided on, am I going to do judo or jiu-jitsu, BJJ jiu-jitsu? And so I won't say the instructor's name in jiu-jitsu, but his program is very good, or it's not here in Philly anymore, but was very good. And it was a different kind of BJJ than you see now, even though many of the great BJJ guys in Philly now actually came from him. They're under Gracie's and stuff now, but this is the root. He made everyone do the self-defense section first. So it was different than the game now. But so I joined his club, and and I will say their name, Liberty Bell Judo. At the same time, because of work and schedule and other things, I'm like, I'm going to give basically 6 months to both. And which one just feels like it's going the right direction for me is the one I'm going to pick. And the goal of it, when I decided on the picking, because they both have competition, was which one I thought would work, in my experience, on the street the best.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did both. And Liberty Bell Judo won. Now, again, am I picking a style over a style? You can say maybe, but you also got to look at who you're training with in both places. Lou Moorman, the guy who founded Liberty Bell, is legendary. He was part of directing one of our Olympic teams. He was an Ishikawa student.
Mm.
And at that time in that club, you had high-level judoka in there. You had what led me into the Sambo world was you had Anatoly Kenis, Sergei Kazitsky, Mikhail Kouzitsky, these guys became coaches of mine. Marius Aneshe, who became a BJJ black belt under one of the clubs, but also was a junior Olympian, I think, under Romania. I mean, I was on a mat as a baby, not baby in age, with guys that made you learn real and well and fast. And I was like, that's the direction I'm going. Like, and once I got to the street, it actually made me, a lot of stuff goes to the ground in the world. And when you handcuff people, a lot of times they're on the ground. But the thing that which judo has what's called newaza, which is ground fighting. BJJ came from judo. No matter what they say, it came from judo. It's the focus. But I always, the feeling was I'd rather control who goes to the ground and how. Right. And judo definitely gave you that.
Yeah.
And so I learned that in there. And in some incidents not long after I started training, I was like, man, this is I'm really getting control of people. I'm not hitting anybody. I'm just in there, easily getting them down. And at times, the thing I actually had to learn a couple times is you're trying to get in the dojo killers down, guys that can, and it's not easy, Right. And then when you get against somebody that doesn't know what's coming, you're like, oh wait, he's flying.
Right. So less resistance because they don't know that
they have no idea, right? Or they'll walk right into it,
right?
So there was a adjustment period, but that initially the law enforcement end is what made me pick that direction. And like I said, fortunately, I learned under great people. My three primary coaches there is Lou's the original, and then Anatoly Kenis and Mikhail Kouzitsky, who later got me into the Sambo. And Libertyville still exists. They still have a great program. I got my judo black belt through them. And if you want to get into judo in the Philadelphia area, it's definitely a place you should go. Mid-90s, Sambo started to make a little bit of noise, and I learned, hey, two top Sambas are right here in Philly again, and one of them, whose father is a legend in Sambo, from the Soviet Union, and he himself is an international level master of sport in Sambo and Judo from the old Soviet Union, are right here with me. And through them, I got into my first Sambo competition, a team competition. And with those guys on my team, and then Marius Aneshe, a judo guy doing crossover, we smoked. It was wasn't fair.
Well, now there's two kinds of Sambo, right? There's like combat Sambo, which is like an MMA kind of.
So there's essentially like three variations. So it was created for the military, and the security services of the old Soviet Union. Its mother art is judo, the same as BJJ.
Right.
The founders were actually given, I believe, second degree black belts from Jigoro Kano himself, Kano Jigoro, the founder of judo.
Yeah.
And then they went back to the Soviet Union and blended it with boxing and wrestling, and there's many indigenous wrestling styles in all the old Soviet Union, the stands and the Caucasus and all. And they blended all that stuff together, and they made a martial art for their security forces, whether it was law enforcement, military, or intelligence, whatever.
And it wasn't directed by lawyers.
Yeah, there was no lawyers in the way. And if they were, someone probably got rid of that lawyer.
Right.
But eventually they started saying, hey, we can bring this to the masses to a level 2 and also lift the level of our troops if we add a competitive aspect. So you still have that Sambo where, like, the traditional tools were the bayonet, the entrenching tool, a knife, stuff like that. Even though Sambo is an acronym, means self-defense without weapons.
Mm.
And they added, like you said, the two sporting formats. For the most part, in the beginning, the first sporting format was Sport Sambo, which has a lot of similarities to Judo and Jiu-Jitsu. Keeps the flavor of Judo as far as it's more focused on the takedown. You talk to a lot of people when you say Sambo, especially back in the day, everyone's like leg locks, leg lock, leg locks.
Right.
Yeah, they had a lot of leg locks, but the focus was always the takedown.
Yeah.
Leg locks in Sport Sambo to, I guess, maybe make it a little different than Judo. You have arm locks, you have pins like Judo, but Judo band that allows no competitive. It does have leg locks in the traditional format, but competitively, there's no leg locks in Judo. In Sambo, there is, but in Judo, there are chokes. In Sports Sambo, there's no chokes.
Okay.
I don't know if it was just a way to separate it a little, but
Right.
But back to the street, that even there, the philosophy, like Judo has a lot of rules. Back in the day, a lot less. When I first started Judo, unfortunately, I think a lot of the new rules have made it more of a game, like my complaint about a lot of BJJ, and
Yeah.
less of a combat art or combat sport. Where Sambo never changed it, so you can grip almost any way you want in Sambo, as long as you're using that offensively. You're not just trying to be passive. You can use any kind of takedown. In Judo, you can't grab the legs anymore, which is one of the most basic takedowns in all grappling, including Judo.
And rest.
It's
Single
in the
leg,
code
double leg. Right.
Yeah. So Sambo, any kind of freestyle wrestling takedown, any Greco takedown, any Judo takedown, many of the indigenous style takedowns, even double belt grabs, stuff like that are all part of Sambo. So that is more real to me, and the rule set is more real to me. It's very to the point, be aggressive, be on top. You don't have 4 hours to submit somebody on the ground on your back. You don't want to be there, and that goes back to the combat thing.
Especially in law enforcement.
Law enforcement or the military. I mean, listen, let's face it. The more I'm rolling around, here's another misnomer with law enforcement. They'll say, "Oh, the guy was unarmed," and the officer wasn't. Anytime police officers engage in a physical confrontation with somebody, it's armed. It's an armed confrontation. There's a gun there. There's other weapons there, and sadly, a large number of officers die with their own gun.
Yeah.
The gun's there. The more I grapple with you, the more opportunities, especially on the ground, just rolling around, to get that gun. Yes, there's ways that when we train it to grapple and try and protect your gun and stuff like that, but it's more opportunity. So laying on my back, and I've actually done drills like this with both in the military and in law enforcement, and we'll grapple with a fake gun, obviously, or the little zapper stick. And guys are totally dominating somebody if it was a grappling match.
Yeah.
And next thing you hear him going, like, he's being stabbed, or the guy's going for that beautiful triangle choke. And all of a sudden his gun's taken away. Well, the minute you lose your gun, you lost.
Yeah.
That's the reality of grappling with weapons. So, I mean, the Sambo mentality of I don't want to lay around. I want to get you down, control or submit you quick. And basically, Judo has a similar mentality. One of the advantage I give to BJJ over Judo and Sambo, though, is a lot of times to try not to get pinned or stuff. And it's also a problem with wrestling for the street is guys will go to their belly or turtle up, which is on their hands and knees, so that they don't lose the game, which can be death on the street. you
Right.
know, where BJJ, to their credit, the you know, discourages that. Not that there's guys that don't fight out of those positions, but for the most part, it discourages that, and that makes sense. The thing is, you just don't want to stay on your back, you know. But it's so that led me into the Sambo world, and I love it. And later, the combat Sambo came in, and as you can, anyone that likes MMA, you see the wave that's taken over MMA worldwide. They're all Sambas, combat Sambo guys. Whether it's the UFC with Makachev or the old before he left Khabib or Fedor, all these guys are all combat Sambo guys. And it's the closest thing I've seen to true combat. And some people say, well, what about MMA? I said, how many times in the street do you fight without clothes on? Because sometimes the MMA guys will say, well, you guys wear a jacket. Well, in the real world, most people have 90 some percent are probably going to have some kind of clothes on.
Yeah.
I can teach you how to grip a t-shirt. If you do it right, it won't rip right off. And but combat
you're wearing a zip-up hoodie. I've got on a sweatshirt. You know.
Exactly. And so the rules in combat Sambo, you can punch, you can kick, you can knee. It's all full contact. Knee, you can headbutt still.
Wow.
Until 2012, you could strike the groin. 2012 was when they said no groin strike.
2012, they got civilized.
Yeah. So I mean that's and
hardcore.
with that aggressive rule set, if you go passive, you're getting penalized and you'll get DQ'd. It makes you fight, and in a real street, you can't dance around. I mean, it's not real. So, and the thing I think that my personal thing that I think the strength of the Sambo is the transition, the ability to move, chain things together to a finish, whether it's a control position or a submission or a knockout, flawlessly. Not like judo. Like judo will do a great takedown, but what do you see a lot now? Because if I throw you to your back, whether I follow you to the ground or not, or drop to my knees and do it, I win. So you'll see a lot of judo players do a great throw. They'll over accelerate. The guy will hit the back. Yeah, they'll win in judo, and then they'll roll over him. Well, in a real fight or street, if that guy's not out, which he might be, I mean, being smashed in the street's probably not comfortable, but let's not forget drugs, adrenaline, and alcohol. You roll over, now that guy's on top of you.
Right.
Sambo, you can't win by a great throw to the back if I follow you to the ground or I drop first. The only way to win with a perfect throw, which is very hard, is I throw you to your back and I stay planted on my feet.
Wow.
Not very easy. I can get 4 points if I drop you to your back the other ways I talked about. But if I over rotate and I roll over and you get on top, you hold me for 20 seconds, the guy I just threw got 4 points. So now my work was nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, that's to me more practical. It's great to get a nice takedown, but we got to be in control.
Right.
So we end up in the advantageous position. So it's I don't know. So now, I mean, the main thing I do.
Gis and like wrestling singlets, right? Or
Gis and skin tight, like a gi jacket, they call it kurtka.
Yeah.
And skin tight shorts.
Yeah.
And you wear shoes that look like wrestling shoes, but they're actually smooth on the bottom.
Like black shoes are smooth on the bottom.
Yeah, and so you can sweep well with them.
Oh, cool.
That's the goal. Like one of the main goals. So your feet don't stick. And then of course the Sambos where, I mean, I still am part of the Hapkido. I still train in the Hapkido, and still part of some big events at the Korea Hapkido Federation and Hapkido United. But I mean, my main efforts nowadays is the Sambo.
you go over a lot. I see on your Facebook, and we communicate, fairly frequently, that you're like in Russia all the time. I mean,
Yeah,
are you
so I'm
you're coaching the U.S. team, or you're on
the
the U.S. team?
I'm the national team head coach for the U.S. for
Wow,
Sambo.
that's great.
The one person I mentioned before, Mikhail Kozitsky, or he just calls himself Michael, which is what Mikhail is.
Yeah.
Is the vice president of USA Sambo, but he's also on the technical committee for Sambo for the whole world, which is FIAS, the Federation International Amateur Sambo, and that is recognized by the U.S. or not U.S. the International Olympic Committee. And he's on the executive committee for FIAS. So there's a coaching program by the International Federation to certify people to be able to be national team coaches. And if you don't have that certification, you can coach over here, you can coach events here. But if you go to a World Cup or World Championship or Continental Championship, you won't be allowed to sit as a coach. So Kozitsky's actually one of the people that can certify you, one of only 3, I think. And so I was the first American-born person in the U.S. to ever get that certification. And so since 2014, almost every Pan American Championship, I've been the U.S. coach. 2015 on, I've been pretty much almost always U.S. national coach for World Cups and World Championships. And there's been a few special events where invitation only, which are very prestigious. And I've been the head coaches for them. So tomorrow I actually
You're
leave.
heading to one. Yeah.
Yeah. Tomorrow I leave for Saudi Arabia as the coach for not only the U.S. but the Pan American region for an invitation-only event in the World Combat Games in Saudi Arabia, paid for by the Saudi royal family. It's the largest combat sport event in the world. 120 some countries, I think, multiple disciplines: Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Sambo, boxing, kickboxing, MMA, all kinds of wrestling, all kinds of combat sports. And so it should be interesting. They had one some years back in China, and they said it rivaled any Olympics ever held. Like
Wow.
the show and the presentation, they say it's unbelievable. I guess I'll find out firsthand this week coming.
Yeah.
We have 3 United States athletes who qualified. Like I said, it's invitation only. And that's from LA, David Areklian. He was originally from Jersey. He's been with us on a few national teams. Just won the Pan American Gold for Combat Sambo. That's what he's doing there. He has Pan American Golds for Sports Sambo too. Ivan Lupinchansky from Indiana, who actually wrestles collegiately and a military guy. He's doing Sports Sambo. And then I was going to call him Dima, which is his nickname for Dmitry Vitovsky, who lives in Jersey. He actually trained with us today. We did a pre-leave workout, and he's doing Sports Sambo. And then we'll be teamed up with the rest of the Pan American region for a team and fighting the Asian selectees, the European selectees, and the African selectees, and then 2 special fighters. So it's only 8 in the division, but there are 8 champions. It's a great martial art, a great sport, and but again, I'm not all like locked into competitive sports or combat sports. I've done the traditional side, I still do, and I've dabbled in the Chinese martial arts during my life. I wouldn't say I'm any kind of expert at them, but I've taken things from them. Both Xing Chuan and the Jook Lum, the Southern Manis, or 2 of them, and I look for good in everything. I tell guys on the combat sports side, don't ignore everything from the traditional side, and I tell those people on the traditional side that we're too deadly to
Yeah.
do, and they, come on, you got to open your eyes. And there's pieces from both ends that can make both ends stronger,
Yeah.
especially when things, you get too stagnant on what you're doing. And I mean, you've done not just one thing the whole time, and there's little pieces that open eyes on, there's stuff from Hapkido that I've slid into Judo and Sambo and vice versa. And
Mm-hmm.
and the drills, like Hapkido has a lot of takedowns too. The way that Judo and Sambo does them and drills them, when you put it on a Hapkido end, makes Hapkido techniques way more efficient and
Oh,
effective.
I can imagine.
So,
There's a grappling art we haven't talked about in the mix of all this, which is Shuai Jiao.
mhm.
Do you have experience with that as well?
No,
Or
I've never done Shuai Jiao. I've worked out with some people that have. I can't say I've gone with anyone high level. I know some people that have from the judo world,
mm-hmm.
but they were considered high level over here. Everything is, they weren't overly impressed with the level, but it could be the level here, like it wasn't in China, it wasn't in Taiwan,
Right.
and so I've actually had interest in it. I bought videos
Yeah.
back in the old VHS days.
They got some interesting training drills where they've got
Mhm.
concrete and poles, and
And I like that, and that's something I like out of even the Okinawan arts and some of the
yeah,
southern Chinese martial arts.
the Hojo Indo.
Those are the stones and all that kind of stuff. It's cool, and it's Shuai Jiao, the belt cracking. And there's similar theories in judo and sambo too to some of that, and they use tools as well. Like sambo and judo love the bands, and bands are great. They're great for balance condition because those bands will pull you back if depending on how thick they are. So you got to have your leverage right. You can snap in. The same thing with the belt crackings to get that snap you need. It's not that you're not just grabbing something heavy and moving it. There's different ways to actually make that happen easier. So I don't have to be the big monster to move a big guy. And so I definitely have interest. But when someone from the U.S. tells me they're the U.S. national Shuai Jiao champion, do I think they're going to stand up against a high level judo guy or sambo guy? Probably not. China, I don't know. Taiwan, I don't know. I would never put it down. I've done traditional wrestling. It's a little bit of a funny story. 2011, there's in the stands, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Bashkortostan, which is a republic in Russia, Tatarstan. There's a type of wrestling, indigenous wrestling, called belt wrestling, or some of them called karas. And this style, under the International Belt Wrestling Federation or Association, you have to keep both hands on the belt. So you can't release. Like there's some kareshes that's more like judo with no ground fighting and all that stuff. This, you both start with a double belt grab, and you're both even. And if you leave go, you'll get penalized. There's two variations. One variation, I can use my legs. They call that freestyle, and the other they call classical, which is more like Greco-Roman wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
I can't intertwine my leg. I can't sweep you with my legs. It's all big lifts, get your hips under. I've done both, but the way it started was kind of funny. I mean, I was in my 40s, and I get a call from my Sambo coach slash Michael, and he's like, "Bob, you wanna go to Russia and fight in the belt wrestling?" And I don't know if one of them was World Cup I did, one was World Championship. I can't remember which one was which, but and fighting this belt wrestling World Championship. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know, because I had no idea what it was. I'm like,
Right.
I'm busy. I got things. He goes, Bob, they'll pay everything. They'll fly you there. They give you a hotel. And I'm like,
Hmm.
all right. What could this be anyway? I'm going to fight a bunch of farmers. I'm thinking traditional, fight a bunch of farmers. They pay for me a free trip. I win a cow cup or something. All right, I'll do it. And so I fly over, have no idea that it's a real sport until I get there and I'm getting in line to get all my registration. I'm looking at all these guys with no necks,
Oh man.
thighs that are giant, and in their 20s and maybe late teens. And I'm like, what is this? What did I sign up for? And then I get up there to get registered, and the old guy signing me in keeps looking down at the name, back at me, and basically says, you're old. I'm like, yeah. He goes, you coach. You're not fight. I said, well, they brought me here to fight. And he points at it, no, they fight. But he signs me in. But it was a huge experience because, again, our ignorance, what we don't know. I mean,
Right.
guys on the team are on the national Greco teams for their country, or they're the one guy I fought. I ended up making it in the freestyle, not the classical, to the repertoire for bronze medal. And the guy I was fighting was from Armenia, who was a European Sambo champion, but he's also doing the belt wrestling. And I had no idea what the rules are. I'm kind of winging the whole thing. My whole thing is I'm just attacking,
Right.
and not leaving go of the belt. And what I didn't realize is if you win first, second, or third, you not only get a cup, you win money.
Right.
He knew that though. And so we're going at it, and the only other American with us um, got handled pretty good. So I'm sure he was like, thank God I got the American. This will be easy. I'll walk through. And I'm just like, all right, I'm just going to try and snap them to me and do what Judo calls a kosotogari. It's basically wrapping my same side leg around the back of his, and drive through him. And I get him to step, I hit him with it, and I get 4 points. His eyes were so wide, the whole place went crazy because the dumb American did it. And now he's, yeah, and the old American. So now he might have, I think he might have had 2 points on me before that or something, whatever. It went back and forth, but he's running from me, and I don't realize he's getting penalized. And after you get a certain amount of passivity penalties, you get disqualified. And I'm just attacking, which was stupid strategy at this point. And everyone's yelling at me, but in Russian, stop attacking. Because if he doesn't attack, he gets one more penalty, disqualify, I win.
Right, but you don't know.
I
Yeah.
don't know. So I'm attacking, he counters me, I end up losing, and then his own coach comes over and is like, why you attack? I'm like, because I have no idea what I'm doing.
The rules.
And he won, but it was an awesome experience. And then the next year I did it again. And in the classical style, I did win a couple matches. I didn't make it to any medal round. But the huge Tatar, who was like 400 pounds, adopted me. So I ate with him. I have a picture somewhere of me sitting between these two giants eating dinner. But it's again, but that's been absorbed in the Sambo too. But it's amazing what some of these sports that we don't know about. I mean, through Sun, I was exposed, which probably helped me in this once I did it. The traditional Korean wrestling is called Shiram, and Sun Tae-soo, my Hapkido teacher, always made us train Shiram as a method of conditioning and cross training and stuff because he did Shiram in Korea. He wasn't a big guy, so he wasn't pro, but he did the village or the regional or the town, whatever. Shiram did very good, and so so I had that experience. And they use a belt, and then it straps around the leg too. It's called a satba, and but even those guys, you go against a good Shiram guy, try and move their hips, and God bless you if they get their hips under you.
Yeah.
You know, and everyone's like, it's a dumb sport. Yeah, it's a dumb sport unless they get a hold of you. It was another unique experience. And actually, Sambo and I got to thank Michael Kaczynski, Mikhail, for getting me into that. And a cool, really cool experience. I met some good people. Some I'm still in touch with. But I learned again, some simple things are very practical. Even if it's just enhancing a skill set like balance and leverage and all stuff that is key in the real world.
Yeah.
But even Chinese martial arts, if you don't have that root, and once you get advanced, the root can't be stuck. You have to be able to move and still have that balance.
Right.
Those are things that traditional martial arts teach maybe more than some of the combat sport, but maybe not the same stance, but some of that skill set could transfer over and make someone more effective, especially if you go to street. Balance is key in the street. You don't want to be on the ground. You can be the greatest jiu-jitsu guy in the world. You still don't want to be down there unless you have to. Something made it happen.
Right. So after 9/11, you re-signed up for the military, yeah?
Yeah. So after 9/11, I was like, I want to go. I want to go in. I want to deploy. I heard about a unit. There were some police officers in it, guys, and other guys that were in it were from good active duty military. We had a SWAT guy. We had a couple Marine Corps infantry instructors who now went into this unit. Some guys from the 101st Airborne. Like, it was a good corps. So it was Pennsylvania National Guard. It was a Striker Brigade, 56 Striker Brigade. 1st and 111th Infantry, which is famous because Ben Franklin founded it. Wow. It was a militia back in Philadelphia during the Revolution, so it's the longest standing unit in our military. And they have a reconnaissance platoon. And so I got into the reconnaissance platoon. I was with these guys. The cool thing in our thing is we had several guys that did Muay Thai, MMA, BJJ, and then my background. And so right from the get-go, part of our just bonding, and it was no matter when we got together, we would train a lot. And that included when we went to Iraq. The Army has a thing called the Modern Army Combatives Program. At the time, it was kind of like BJJ light. I get the theory of what the goal was. Most of the first level was ground fighting, and it wasn't so much to be as effective in combat as it was to build a way to build the warrior ethos, as they call it, to make guys fight without getting hurt so they can't really fight in the real fight.
Right.
So it was a lot of grappling type stuff for the most part, but not even a lot of takedowns. A couple takedowns, but not. I mean, I probably shouldn't say my joke, but whatever. I don't want to get arrow shot at me by BJJ guys. But it wasn't great wrestling takedowns, and it wasn't good like judo style takedowns. But it was competitive. So I competed as the oldest guy, just about. I won some medals or certificates. I competed in Iraq, and which was really funny because the stands were packed. I was the oldest guy, and the sergeant majors, all the old guys came over and rooted for the old guy. I did okay. I did pretty good, but I coached our team, our recon team, and we did pretty good as a whole. But I mean, we would go out on missions, come back, and you don't just fall asleep. And if we're back before it was time to go, be able to get some early morning chow before we go to sleep, we would go. A lot of us would go train, and that's what we would do to decompress. Is whether it was rolling or boxing or kickboxing or a mix, whatever. But Modern Army Combatives was something we always did, but we did more of our own stuff. And to be honest, I think it made them more effective, because, again, if we were to fight, we would use more of what we did on our own than just roll around on the ground, because you're not rolling around on the ground much when you're doing infantry operation. We did time sensitive targeting and tactical site exploitation, which is basically raids, was our primary, but we did other stuff too. And if you're going to take someone into custody, same as in law enforcement, of course you have a little more leeway in a combat area, but you're not rolling around with them, especially in more rolling around maybe in a law enforcement end. You don't have to roll around in a military side in a combat arena. So I thought our stuff that we did on our own was much more practical. Then, though I've heard the modern Army Combatives program has evolved a lot since then, and started bringing back in more realistic type training, I would call it, where guys are learning to resist being on the ground, or training with weapons on. I mean, not live weapons, obviously, but, how to battle with your gear on. I mean, that's real. You're not rolling in just an army uniform, even though that's what you compete in the competitions. Right. You got body armor on. Talk about trying to
you gotta
roll. And the way it's shaped, you don't have that rolling ability. Try rolling with someone on top of you with body armor on you. It's all that cool maneuvering you're doing in jiu-jitsu, you're not doing it. And so I hear they've gone a lot more that way. I hope that's true, because I think it's way better for them. It makes sense. And so that's what I did for the most part in Iraq. As far as the combatives, our platoon was very strong with it. And when I say combatives, both the Army's version and our own, whatever we decided to do. We were pretty squared away as far as that went. And it's KISS is still what wins, no matter if you're in that environment too. Keep it simple, stupid is the name of the game. And then I got out and came back to the law enforcement world, because I deployed. I stayed employed, and later retired from Philadelphia Police in 2018 and went to where I work now for a state, and became defensive tactics instructor for the state, and really try and keep things live. On the own, I became connected to a place called NPR Endurance MMA. In there, the owner is a former pro MMA fighter, good wrestler, jiu-jitsu black belt, trained with us in Sambo for decades. He's an international medalist in Sambo, but he did a lot of security work and personal security work too. And then another guy that's with us who's a former pro boxer, pro MMA fighter, and multiple time international medalist in Sambo, who also did a lot of security work. And we sat down and put our brains together, and it gets honed all the time, but we designed kind of our own self-defense / military combative / defensive tactics program. We've displayed it for the police chiefs of all Bucks County, a U.S. military unit that was being deployed to Africa for AFRICOM. Their command decided, hey, rather than just do the combatives, they came, checked out what we did. They asked us for their deployment to train them in our stuff for their deployment. Ours is still based on KISS. There's no magic bullets in it. But we train everything from, getting dependent on who the audience is. Self-defense for civilians, totally different. Not totally different, but there's a lot of differences than for law enforcement, who needs to probably control someone and eventually take them into custody. to military where you don't need to. It depends, but you don't need to grapple and take people into custody so much if they're fully resisting. I mean, war's war. It's a little different now. If you're in a personal security detachment, a PSD, you might do more of the law enforcement style. So we teach according to what they're there or what their needs are. But a traditional martial artist will see a lot of similarities in what we teach. And so we'll combat martial artists. But it's not the same.
Right.
We teach weapon retention. We teach how to battle from a vehicle, battle out of a vehicle, take people out of a vehicle. I mean, things that you don't teach, fight on walls, which a lot of cage fighting, that's a practical aspect, actually. A wall is, you're in a store and something goes wrong, you're in your house, your business, you're not fighting in a nice matted area where you have all this room, so we take all that into account. But everyone's going to see stuff in that whether you're traditionalist or a combat sport or a mix, you're going to say, oh, we do something like that. And that's what I think is good. We'll look at our audience, and if I know a guy's a Okinawan karate guy, I'll show him how what we call a frame is very similar to some of the Shuto strikes or stuff they're doing, just a little bit of modification. But how that actually works in keeping space for grappling and or controlling or keeping someone away, but it's not that much. It's not alien when you talk their language to them. Right. And I get a little bit of that benefit because I've been in both worlds. So,
has there been a big transformation within you over these decades of changing arts, moving arts, developing more, or has it been kind of like, this is who I am and that's my through line?
I mean, the practical side has always been a part of me. The evolution has been understanding what is practical and what isn't, right, and what the goals are. Like teaching myself by learning from others too. Like I said, that person we talked about with the initials, a lot of what he said in that world that opened my eyes a lot, actually. Because again, you're younger, you can do a lot more. I could, I had some street fights in my day, and everyone says you can't kick high in a fight. Well, I'll tell you, you can. It just depends on the scenario and your skill level and your conditioning and the ground and all. But is that a smart move? No. And I started learning to reevaluate from different people, and then putting different tests. The other thing I learned, and when I started really shaving stuff up a long time ago, then I started thinking, am I shaving too fast? So everyone's like, let's chop all this off and get it to a root because that's what's going to work. But until you know what you're being taught, whether it's a method, a strategy, a technique, till you truly know it, you don't know if it's practical or not. I see guys saying, I'm not going to do that. It'll never work. And then if you give them a little slap in the side of the head and say, listen, we're going to still do that, and you get them honed up. And now you say, okay, we're going to do something because sparring doesn't always have to be sparring per se. I do say this, testing things live. If your goal is self-protection, self-defense, if you do no live training, you can't get that area. But it doesn't necessarily have to be two guys bow or two guys do this and you start sparring. There's drills. I mean, when I'm teaching, like I taught a class today earlier, which has some civilians and law enforcement, and they're not allowed to start any scenario with their hands up. I said, if you can do this the way we're starting, if your hands are up and you're ready, you can easily do it. But the street is different. I'm a predator. I'm waiting until you're not ready, and then I'm coming at you. So that can be live drills, and it's a simple drill we did today, but it's a mix of sport. And so I have the guys. One guy has boxing gloves on, and the other guy's hands are down. He's not allowed to strike because these are law enforcement guys. So I'm trying to build that confidence. And all of a sudden, when I give a signal, that guy with the gloves can start throwing any kind of punches he wants at the guy. The goal of that guy is to not stay in punching range. So you're probably going to have to catch a couple, and hopefully not on your head, but you're starting hands down, just staring at it straight ahead, and the attack comes, and then you react from there, and then you're either trying to get out of punching range, the end of that punch, and maneuver. Now, if it's a street, everyone says run away. Well, what if I'm not fast? That's not always an option. Or get inside. I call it crash. I don't even let them grapple or anything yet. I just want them to control that distance.
Mm-hmm.
But it's while someone's going live, and they're not going full power, but it's not set up. And those are skills that traditional martial artists can do too. And it'll teach you real fast if something works. But just because it doesn't work that time, you gotta know what you're doing before you make the decision this isn't for me. And then the other thing, if you're an instructor, is just because it doesn't work for me doesn't mean Mark Wiley's not going to be good at it and it'll work great for him. We're different.
Yeah.
Different sizes, speeds, heights, flexibility, age. I'm an old guy. You're a young guy. but you know what I mean? That's the other thing I see. I see coaches and instructors say, well, this is, I would never do this. It's no good for me. So I don't teach it. Well, you're shortchanging your students because your student's not you. Right. Throw stuff out. You may give your opinion to them, like, hey, this is why I don't like it, but let's see what you think. You work with it. And even in MMA, you're starting to see traditional stuff slide in because everyone did BJJ wrestling and then Muay Thai.
Right.
Well, now everyone knows the same thing or does the same thing. Now you get the guy that comes in throwing cross kicks and, inward heel kicks and a little bit more bouncy karate style stances.
Jumping kicks too and spin kicks now.
Jumping kicks, spin kicks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I spar combat Sambo and MMA guys and stuff all the time. And believe it or not, one of the number one things I catch them all, and I'm old, fat, and slow now, is a spinning side kick. And they all say the same thing. We all know you're going to do this. We all know it's coming, and you always catch us with it. And it's the setup.
Yeah,
is the way it's done. But the problem for them is I almost always hit the liver with it.
Oh,
so
yeah.
For those that never been hit in the liver, you'll take 50 punches to the face before you take a hard liver shot. Once you experience that, that's your demock. That's the delayed death punch.
Yeah.
Because you hit it, the guy steps back like, that's all right. Oh, boom! The sword goes through their liver, and they fall down. So there's your delayed death touch.
Oh man!
But
cool.
And it's traditional martial art kick. I mean, definitely. But it's timing, reading footwork, or setting some. One of the things you throw. I'm orthodox, so you throw big, heavy right hands. What's the guy do to get away from your power? He circles away from it. So he's circling to my left. Well, my right foot's back. So I throw those bombs. The minute he goes stepping sideways, I don't even have to do a full spin because he steps into a 3/4 spin to his liver. Right. So it's traditional martial arts.
Yeah. So. Well, man, we spent quite a bit of time here tonight. I really appreciate it. Your throat's so dry, you're coughing. That's I get you talking, and then I keep you on another hour, and then next thing you know, you're
Yeah,
falling.
I don't even have water. Usually I do.
A kung fu master told me once. He said, "You take the guy you want to beat up out to an all-you-can-eat buffet. Talk to him about like, hey, why don't we? I'll buy you lunch. We'll talk. We'll be friends." Stuff him for an hour, hour and a half, then beat the shit out of him in the parking lot after. Do anything.
You drink lemon water, and he
Yeah.
eats. He eats as much pork as you can put in him.
Yeah, pork, potatoes, turkey, gravy,
Yep.
all of it.
That's funny.
Yeah. Man, your life has been quite interesting. I'm glad we had this chance to talk this much, because the times we get together and have time for conversation has not been long enough to know this much about you. And I appreciate you sharing it with me and our listeners.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I mean, I love talking to you anyway. Your wealth of martial arts experience and knowledge is it's just awesome. And I think you get it. That listen, you got to have an open mind. You gotta let it all come in, and the minute you start saying, "I'm not doing that," or "That's all garbage," you limit yourself, and you limit what you can help. If you teach, you limit what you can give to your students too.
Mm-hmm.